Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the album series where we look at new albums that have come out, what they do musically and lyrically, and what we can learn from them. Today, we're looking at Eminem's latest record, Revival. With me, as always, is Cliff, aka the Pop Song Professor. He's taking a look at the many, many lyrics, and I've tried to find some consistencies in the music that are worth talking about. Revival, which came out on December 15, 2017, is Eminem's 9th studio album. It is the third part of his trilogy on his addiction to pills, which started off with Relapse in 2009 and Recovery in 2010. Before we get into the analysis, Cliff, what did you think about the album and why, and what were your favorite tracks on it?
Okay, so there was definitely a lot to look at and a lot to think about. I think that what I really liked about this album is it felt like Eminem's character developed a little bit. Like, I come from like a literature analyzing background, like with English literature and stuff, and so I really enjoy dynamic characters who change and develop and grow, and it felt like compared to Eminem's other songs, there was a lot of new stuff here. We got to delve into a little bit more of who he is. He shared a little bit more of himself. He basically apologized for some things, promised to sing about raping women less, and a lot of interesting stuff.
That's a start.
Yeah, that's a good start. That's very good. But he also kind of apologized or, talked about how he felt bad for how he treated his wife and things like that. And so I really, really liked that aspect of it. I think for listening to, like, my favorite song sound-wise and just kind of like where the rhythm flows and everything would be River. And then for sincerity, I really liked Bad Husband and Castle, where he Bad Husband is to his wife, Castle is to his daughter.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, for me, similar. I must say, I did like the growth, and I did hear that as well. Although I did try to focus more on the music than you, of course. Yep. My favorite tracks, I must say, are the ones where I feel like he was most honest, the ones where I could feel his character the most. And that's always where I've found Eminem to be the strongest at. Not necessarily his like diss tracks. I did like his comedy stuff always, almost always. But his honest stuff was always my favorite. So Walk on Water lyrically was probably one of my favorite tracks on the album that gave me goosebumps, even though I really didn't like the production, but we'll get to that. I did like Believe. I liked it for its odd rhythms, and just in terms of the flow, it just shows again that Eminem just again is at the top of his game in terms of in general, in terms of flow, rhyming, and storytelling. Just from a very technical standpoint, Eminem just is, it feels like, above all else, He's a really top-notch rapper, and there's really no doubt that he's one of the greatest rappers of all time in my mind. And I think it shows on this album as well. It's not my favorite album of his, and I am a big Eminem fan. I have, I think, 5 of his 9 records that he has released. But the latest records that he has released, I wasn't so much of a fan of. But there's a lot of things that I do like, and they all have to do with him specifically. So that is, again, as I said, the rhyming, the flow, the lyrics, his performance. What I didn't like so much was the music, which is what I've been focusing on, unfortunately.
That's rough.
Yeah.
Because if I say, like, oh, the lyrics are, they were pretty good, and you say, oh, I really didn't like the music. I mean, that's the law of averages. It would sound like we don't like the album.
Yeah.
But
unfortunately. I also did like Bad Husband a lot. That was one of the tracks that had a feature with Axe Ambassadors that I did like. I thought the lyrics, the chorus here works really well.
Yeah.
And again, it was a personal track. Again, it came back to talking about Kim, his ex-wife, and as you said, apologizing for certain things that he's said and done. I also like Tragic Endings featuring Skylar Grey, which I think was the first one that used double tracking of the vocals again, which is a sound that I do like about Eminem. Like, a lot of the tracks on here are produced very, very simply, I guess. Like, it's just one vocal, right? There's nothing else to like fluff it up or anything like that. It's just one singular vocal performance. Tragic Endings had a double tracking kind of sound, and I do like that. A lot of his older tracks did use a lot of double tracking, but that was back in the day, and during the 2000s, that was the thing that was done a lot. Today we have a lot of single tracking for rap vocals. So I guess he just went with the times, and he is really trying as a musical artist as well to develop himself, and he is succeeding at that in certain regards for sure. In other regards, maybe not so much.
quick question for you.
Yeah.
Just and anybody who's new to the series, in case you didn't know, when it comes to music, I'm the dumb one. So double tracking, is that where he like he raps it twice and then like overlays them with each other so it sounds a little bit deeper then?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay,
And
cool. I'm tracking.
yeah, exactly. So that's double tracking. And then my last track that I wrote down is one of my favorites, and this is probably the one I'm gonna come back to, maybe.
Okay.
So I did like Castle and A Rose as well, for that reason that we're gonna talk about this a little bit more, I think, because those are they're definitely standout songs lyrically. But I found Offended, number 15, really fun. Not musically,
Yeah.
again, it's not musically. It's a really, I don't know. It didn't really strike me as anything. It was interesting, but that's not always a good thing for a songwriter to say about your song. But in terms of lyrics, humor, and flow, I thought that one was just real good fun. There's one little thing where he just mistook the word pizzicato for staccato, I think. So he mixed those two up. But I can forgive him that. And there's one really fast section at the end, which I always think is really fun. And according to some sources on the internet, it's even faster than what he did on Rap God. So if you're interested in that, display of skill, I think Offended is going to be the track to listen to. And that section comes in towards the end of that track.
Yeah, that was his tour de force. Super impressive. My gosh.
And it's a funny track as well because he's using a children's... a nursery rhyme kind of for the chorus, right?
Yeah, he is. Let me pull up those lyrics real quick because and I'm sure we'll get to talk about that more as we go on. But I am curious because let's see. Because I hope you're offended. I hope you offended because you're only gonna make things worse. You can try to hold me down, but you better get up because you're only gonna make things worse. Yeah, I don't know if he uses he doesn't use like a nursery rhyme like the words, but he uses like the rhythm where it sounds very childish.
Oh no, but isn't he like everyone hates me so I'll go eat worms? That's that song, right?
Yeah. They want me to go eat some worms and drag my name through the mud, through the dirt, but I'm gonna make you eat your words, right?
Right. So he's kind of it's a play on words, but it is still that very much that nursery rhyme, and he's singing the same melody and rhythm. So it's definitely a very clear nod towards that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Correctly, at least. Yeah. Cool. So, in general, what was your perspective on the lyrics and the music separately, maybe?
Well, for the music, I don't know. The Eminem that I've listened to has largely been, I don't know, like his most popular stuff. Like I have not gone deep into Eminem at all. And so when I started listening to this album, I realized that I needed to do some more like old school Eminem and really get into, kind of who he was as an artist. And it got really, really interesting. And so, I don't know, let me, I did a lot of analysis of these songs. Let me pull these up. Big hits. Yeah. So I looked at Lose Yourself, Till I Collapse, Love the Way You Lie, Berserk, Rap God, The Monster, No Love, Not Afraid. A lot of other good ones, Stan, of course. And I kind of tried to compare those to what he had written in Revival. And just like musically for my own edification. And I felt like his older stuff tended to be more catchy, and it was stuff that I was more like interested in singing along to. And this one, Revival, felt just a little bit more like stark and a little bit more bare and a little bit more like the music isn't as like pleasing or euphonic. And so I had to spend a lot more time, like if I was going to get some enjoyment out of it, I had to get it out of like the rhythm of what he was rapping and the words that he was saying. And I was able to do that. I felt like despite some of the words in the lyrics being really rough, and we'll have to talk about some of those, and despite sometimes the mixing felt a little bit like weirdly balanced, where his voice almost
was very
felt like
loud.
It felt like an alien in his own track. Like your voice doesn't belong here. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But yeah, even still, like the rhythm of what he did and the skill was what really got me, because when there was no like really awesome choruses to listen to all the time, even though there were some really good ones, and when like the verses were just a little bit like awkward, the beauty and the music of it came in through his voice and like the rhythms that he put together, and how freaking amazing he is at rhyming things. Oh my gosh. Just so much like, I guess I just kind of blanket it all as sound correlation, since there's a lot of rhyme, slant rhyme, imperfect rhyme, assonance, consonants, alliteration, stuff like that. But I really, really enjoyed kind of telling myself, all right, you can't expect what you normally expect out of pop music. You have to kind of listen for the the poetic and the word euphony and find the beauty in that. And of course, not all of the songs are about being beautiful, so sometimes it was even still a little bit difficult. But just the way he puts words together, it was like super impressive. Maybe the best word to describe Eminem and his like musical accomplishments is impressive rather than like beautiful or melodic or something like that. But
yeah, what I'm always really impressed with in all of his career has always been the kind of words that he uses. Because if you look at a lot of hip hop today, it feels like it comes from the same vocabulary, right? It's like maybe 300 to 500 words.
yeah,
Eminem is using words that you never hear in rap music. Not only because he's
chloroseptic. What is chloroseptic?
great, I love it, but it's like it's a lot of long words, which is very unusual for hip hop, or at least for modern hip hop. That is, he's using a lot of those words, and what he's really good at is finding rhymes for all of them. There's a really, really cool video that I urge all of you to see on Vox, the YouTube channel, VOX. That's one of my favorite YouTube channels. And I think it was on Vox. At least the title.
Is it where he rhymes with orange?
That's the one I'm talking about. Is it? That was
it might
Vox,
be
right?
Genius.com for that one.
Oh, yeah. You might be
Maybe,
right. It might be Genius as well. That's another really good one. So
yeah.
check that out. I think it's called Eminem Raps Oranges or something like that, or rhymes with something with oranges. It's called something like that. And oranges is a really tough word to rhyme to. And it shows a couple of places where in his songs he's used the word oranges and rhymed it very skillfully. So that's a lot of fun to watch.
To be fair, he relies heavily on his Midwestern American accent, which they can get away with a lot.
The oranges.
Orange, door hinge. Yeah.
That's so great, though. That is so much fun.
Oh, yeah, and he was, like, angry, too. He was like, what's up with all these idiots saying that you can't rhyme with orange? Like, I can think of, like, 10 ways to rhyme with orange right now. Like,
yeah.
Okay, back off. But it was super impressive.
Yeah, it was super impressive. But so one of the things he does, I think, unless you had anything more to say, maybe about the critical part of our feedback here.
No, go for it.
Okay, so one of the things I think he does, so he has these lyrical chains. That's what it feels like to me, right? Mm-hmm. To get that kind of flow with that many rhymes, while still making sense. I think the process for writing something like that, and I've written something like that as well, not for myself typically, but for other rappers and stuff like that. The process typically for me has been, you start off with one line that just sounds good by itself, that has a nice rhythm to it. Mm-hmm. And then you duplicate the rhythm of that phrase, and you see what are the vowels in that phrase. And can I duplicate that phrase with the same vowels and that same rhythm somehow? So I'll look at the first word, and it's maybe, word. And so I'll find, rhymes for the word. And you'll go online or whatever if you need the tools, or some people are really good at coming up with rhymes by themselves. But anyways, you might have a list of, 10, 20 words. And there's a lot of different ways to rhyme, which is something that I explain on my lyric writing master files. There's 6 different ways to find rhymes for a single word. Half rhymes and all this kind of thing, familiar rhymes, family rhymes. And so you might have a list of a lot of words that rhyme with the word word. I should have picked another word than word, shouldn't I? And then you just pick the one with so you have that was your first vowel, and then you have a second vowel, which might be orange, and for that you have 10 words. So, and then from those combinations, you have a lot of combinations, like 10 times 10, what is that, 100 different combinations or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then from those 100 combinations, you just pick 2 words that go well together and tell your story. That's kind of, in a very technical manner, explained how that kind of works. And that's I think, what Eminem does a lot. So that's one thing he does, is he has like one rhythm, and then he repeats that over and over again with different rhymes for the vowels that he has in that first line. And the other thing that he does is he has this 3-3-2 kind of groove, and it's really easy to see. I think it's easiest to see this in that video that went viral a couple of months ago when he did this diss freestyle thing in this parking lot on Donald Trump. I'm sure you've seen it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is really interesting to see, because first of all, I do think it was freestyle. I don't think it was. I don't think it was prepared that much because he sometimes struggles, and you see there was even one point where he like messes up, and he's like, no, hold on, and he goes again.
Yeah, he has like a false start.
Exactly, and it's not on a particular groove. Like he's just rapping into nothingness, right? It's not like on a fixed kind of beat. So it was just really free, and that's how he comes up with his ideas, I think. And then later he has to fit it to the beat somehow.
Yeah. I actually, you know what? Real quick, I found an example of the first kind of rhyme you were just talking about. And then, so like in Framed, he said, or in Offended, he says, 8-year-old with the wordplay, girl, take this poll like a survey. Today wasn't my birthday, but I'm kicked up like a dessert tray. Like that's what you were talking about, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and it's just like he throws so many of them in there, and it's like so dense, like that there's hardly a word that isn't rhymed. But
exactly, anyway. It's just rhyme after rhyme. And so the thing is, he might. That's one of the cool things about writing lyrical chains like that. So let's stick with this first idea, maybe first.
Okay.
So if you have that word, so you get the and the a kind of sound, right? And so after a while, you just might change one of them for like a, or you might change the a for an e sound or something like that. And you just keep going with that for a while until you run out of ideas with that, and maybe you have like an idea for. So maybe you have a line that has that e in the first half of the line. In the second half, you checked out all the rhymes. None of them really do work with whatever you're trying to say. So you just start a new one. So at that point, once you've run out of all the rhymes that make sense with your theme, you just pick a new word that just kind of makes sense with the line that you've already written that has that E in it. And then you keep rolling with those two vowels until you run out of ideas with that one. And that's kind of how you keep going.
He's doing that exact same thing in this line here. So it goes from dessert tray, so it's an A, right? And then we're in shape because you're in a slur-in state. So he adds an in the middle, or an I sound in the middle between the and the A. And he starts doing a lot of imperfect rhymes. Uranate after endurin rape. Yeah,
right.
Perfect example there. And it's so easy to find it. Like I had it pulled up. I had my computer pulled up to this one place where he does it because he does it so much.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And what he also does with that to make that work, and I think it's something that typically as a songwriter, as a lyricist, I would never do. But for him, it works really well because it makes his rapping sound more sophisticated, more complicated, and it puts a focus on the length of his words, and that is to stress syllables that you otherwise wouldn't stress. So he has this one line that I wrote down: to not ruin your expectations. Right? That's not how you typically would pronounce that, but that's just how it fits into his rhythm scheme, into his rhythm formula, if you so to say. And so a line might start with the syllables pectations, which doesn't make sense as for a lyricist, but for him, he just uses that to stay within that lyrical framework, within that rhythmical framework.
Yeah, and as far as like the music that I like to listen to, I always think of like changing the rhythm of it, like changing the rhythm of a word to fit your rhythm. It's kind of like something that you have to do sometimes. I don't know, maybe you can speak to this. I don't think that it's an ideal tactic because it almost feels like cheating in a way. Because for me, like if I'm a listener, it makes me think about what he's doing rather than just enjoying what he's saying. I recognize that like you sometimes just have to do that with rap because, you know, we only have so many words to choose from. But I mean, what do you think about that? Is that cheating, and does it matter?
I disagree. First of all, I think there's a lot of rappers who do just write lyrics that make sense, where the stresses make sense. Especially if you look at like 90s and early 2000s rap, especially. There's a lot of stuff that is just like, I mean, Gangsta's Paradise, I think, is pretty much spot on with all the stresses. Like everything just makes sense. It feels like that's how you would normally say it, right?
Yeah.
I like it though. I don't think it qualifies as cheating because it's not really there's a quality that comes out when you do that where it's really about just how crazy can we get with this? How much rhyme can you punch into a single line? And that's what really comes out. It's a sort of meta thing, right? It's a really like, this is just for the rappers. This is for the people who are really interested in skill in rhyming, right? It's not really the lyrics. It's amazing that the lyrics make sense too. That's how I see it. To me, it's amazing that it also makes sense. But I think the main goal was to just have lyrics that just sound really skillful and impressive.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I in no way think that it makes anybody less skilled necessarily or anything like that. And I enjoy what I would call like a cheat. I'm not saying that it's like a bad cheat, but yeah, interesting. Sometimes they will sacrifice the rhythm for the sake of the rhyme. So you
Yeah.
can definitely see like what's more important
Yeah.
to the person writing the lyrics.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe we should start with what was the first single off of the album, Walk on Water, featuring
Water.
Beyonce. Yeah.
Yes.
What did you think about it?
First of all, Beyonce was awesome. A lot of the people that he had feature on this album did really, really well, and she did one of the best, I thought. But yeah, Walk on Water was really good. I thought as far as like what I value in lyrics, which is an artist sounding at least like, because it's impossible to tell whether somebody's sincere, but at least sounding like they're sincere and vulnerable and telling me something about what it's like to be them. If an artist isn't letting me know what it's like to be them, then there's really not a lot more that they can tell me. They can preach at me and tell me to believe something, or tell me that I need to act a certain way or do something or think about the world slightly differently. But no, any author or artist is the world's only true expert on themselves, and so when they share something about who they are as a person, I value that more than just about anything else they could tell me, because then I can empathize with them, learn from them, something like that, without it feeling like they're telling me I have to feel a certain way. Instead, I can just feel it with them. So I appreciate that in all art that I study. And I thought that Walk on Water was a really good example of him sharing some real stuff about what it means to be Eminem. And I mean, really, who better could tell us what it's like to come from nothing, to just come from Detroit, Michigan, working in factories, doing this stuff, and then to just come up from the complete bottom and then be working with Dr. Dre, to be writing raps, to be, getting Rihanna as a feature on your songs, to be so famous and so well known. And then to go from that, to have an overdose, to be divorced from his wife twice, all sorts of difficult life things, and then all of a sudden the critics start hating his music, and his more recent albums didn't do so well. And he's also 42. I think it's 42 or 45, but he's like older now. He's getting to be like the age of like my parents. And for somebody to be, just this god of rap, basically the rap god, right? And then to go to a place where he's older and maybe a little bit more mature, I think that this song had a lot of pressure on it for me personally, to show us who Eminem is now and what his older, maybe more mature perspective on what he's done in life. He can kind of look back and see what things, how they have gone, since he hasn't released an album in like 4 years before this one. And so I was really, really hoping to find out more about what it was like to be him. And Walk on Water did that. I think at times it was a little bit forced and maybe a little bit dramatic when it didn't necessarily need to be. Why are expectations so high? Is the bar I set, my arms I stretch, but I can't reach. So sometimes he would be, a little bit, he did come across as whiny a couple of times on the album, but at the same time I understand. And I didn't want to delegitimize him being whiny. I wanted to let him do that, and I wanted to hear it, and he didn't disappoint. So I really like that about Walk on Water, is he just talks about, how it's difficult to be him. He says, people are stripping me of my confidence, if that's what you're trying to do, mission accomplished. He calls himself a rap god, but he goes ahead and talks about a couple of other heroes of his, B.I.G., Pac, Rakim, Prince, a couple other folks. And then in verse 3 was one of my favorite lines. It's true, I'm a Rubik's, a beautiful mess, at times juvenile, yes, I goof and I jest, a flawed human, I guess. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I really agree with you, especially on what you said with the only thing an artist really can tell is how they feel, and being authentic is really just the greatest message an artist can share. I found it funny that you said he's catching up on your parents in terms of age, because that's obviously just shifting parallelly. Is he aging faster than your parents, you think?
Oh yeah, no.
It's got to be the drugs, man.
He's got a ways to go to catch up before the album my parents would drop. Eminem is not anywhere near dropping that album yet. So
great. So I feel a lot of the things that you said about this album, about this song as well, Walk on Water. I I was really surprised by how it starts with a very short 30-second verse, which is so unlike Eminem, who's always had like at least a 1 minute plus kind of verses. It's very unusual for him to drop like a very short poppy kind of 30-second verse like that. That was just really surprised me. Also really appreciated the honesty and the authenticity. It really came across as if that's really what he's going through at the moment. And I so understood what he is going through, because I have that too a lot with my songs, that just the pressure is getting so big. And especially if it's been, what did you say, 4 years until his last album?
I believe
pressure
so, yeah.
must be building like crazy, and everyone's expecting just the best from him. I thought it was really cheesy with the samples in the background of him writing and constantly ripping paper. I thought that was a little bit, and you hear him like, just in the background, just going like, this is not good enough, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of cheesy, but what I found interesting about this track in particular was that there's no drums, which is unusual for a rap song. There's like a subtle bass drum in the second half of the chorus to just kind of add some interest, I think. And Beyonce is delivering, as you said, a very nice chorus. Although this kind of brings me to my biggest issue with the entire album and with the new Eminem. It's not the Eminem that I fell in love with in a way,
Yeah,
and I think so. The big thing is Eminem he is still doing an amazing job, I think. I think him as a rapper is just without a doubt one of the greatest rappers out there. But the production and just doing features with artists like that just doesn't ring true with who he is as a character. Like his image, like the image that I have of Eminem is just a very different one than that. Like he's the guy from the underground. He's like, he came out of nowhere, right? It's got to have that underground hip hop kind of feel. And it's this pop edge that I really don't like. And you mentioned River being one of your favorite tracks. And I just like, the first time I heard like he was doing a feature with Ed Sheeran, I was like, no, this is just not right. It just doesn't fit him. And
you're totally right. Yeah.
For me, it's just like, it just doesn't fit. And it's a good song, but I'm like, if I looked at that just without the context of what I know about Eminem, it would be a great song. But just knowing what I know, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Look at Beyonce. I mean, she used to do a lot of the pop stuff, and I would say that maybe you can probably speak to this better, since I haven't listened to a ton of old school Beyonce other than just the hits. But I would have equated old school Beyonce with kind of current day Rihanna, and so it makes sense that an older version of Beyonce would come in and do a feature for an Eminem song. But current, like modern day Beyonce, some of the stuff she's put out has been like super artistic, and it's been very much like high art, and it hasn't done well, in the pop circles or anything like that. And it's been pretty fantastic. And so it kind of fits this song. It's kind of like, if Beyonce wants to talk about race relations, Eminem wants to talk about, kind of his career drying up a little bit and him trying to like sort things out. I can kind of see like, all right, this is something real. This isn't something you're necessarily trying to get on the charts, even though it sort of was. So I kind of like, I see the connection there, but I would have never put Beyonce and Eminem together. And you're so right. Like Eminem and Ed Sheeran on the same track, it doesn't make sense.
What were they thinking, really?
Yeah.
It's just
Ed Sheeran talks about like, when I was growing up, I would listen to Eminem and stuff like this. Well, I mean, that's great, but Eminem and Ed Sheeran, just completely different personas. Ed Sheeran's all about being the cute, friendly guy next door, the good guy, the nice guy who finishes last, perhaps. And then Eminem is definitely far from that. He's not even in the same ballpark.
I mean, Ed Sheeran just released this new video for Perfect, which I think is just one of the cheesiest. I think it's an awful video. It's just like, how could they let's just make this cuter, it's like, oh, snow, and then there's twinkles in everyone's eyes, and then no, there's a little kitten, it's just, oh my God, just how many things can they throw in there to make me want to puke? It is really awful. Like, I have nothing against romantic comedies, but that video was even too much for me. That was way over the top. I can hear the influences of Eminem in Ed Sheeran's writing, as I said in my artist series video on him. He definitely he uses a lot of rap when he sings. It makes sense, but just image-wise, they just don't match, I think. So,
and Ed Sheeran is like pop in a test tube sometimes, and Ed Sheeran is pop in a test tube. Eminem is just wild and crazy and does whatever he wants. And if the rhyme says, if this rhyme sounds really good, he's gonna take his rap in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And it's just like funny because on his first couple of albums, he was just making fun of these pop stars. He was making fun of Britney Spears and Fred Durst and all these kind of people who were really hype back then. And it's just it feels wrong that he's like now doing features with them, and it feels like a really sellout kind of move, unfortunately for me. And it's funny because like his lyrics, his own voice on this feels very authentic, feels very real, feels still underground, feels still like there's this really distraught kind of soul who's still trying to make sense of things. But then it's combined with this really like happy-go-lucky, everything is perfect. Literally, the last song of Ed Sheeran, this is called Perfect. In this kind of world, it just collides and it doesn't make sense to me. So the image that I have from Eminem is this really personal, sophisticated, very smart, but also sarcastic and anti-establishment kind of image.
You know that the topic of River is perfect for an Ed Sheeran song, because I've posted a video, and I'll talk to anybody about Ed Sheeran being too nostalgic for the sake of nostalgia in a harmful way that causes us to expect unrealistic things from relationships, so that when a relationship doesn't pan out in an Ed Sheeran kind of way, we're like, oh, this must not be true love. And I have some huge, actually some ethical problems with that. Not that Ed Sheeran's a bad guy, but at the same time, what Eminem is doing on that track and his rap is it's actually one of the least sincere tracks on the album, because he's telling a different story.
Yeah.
And it's about like basically a love triangle, and he is hurting this lady wants to cheat on her husband with him, but she tells Eminem that the husband doesn't know, or that the husband she's going to divorce him anyway, so it doesn't matter or something. So Eminem's like, oh, I'm not cheating on somebody else. That's okay. But then it turns out like she backstabs him, and then he's trying to decide whether or not he should leave her. Like, has she been hurt too much and something like this? And it's a made up story that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't correlate to any Eminem history that I've heard yet, even though something like that could have happened to him, I'm sure. The last little bit is about, he mentions an abortion. That's a pretty interesting, little like self-dialogue where he asks like, is it okay to lie to our unborn child or something like that. So there's some interesting things there, but out of all of the tracks on the album, I think it's one of the very few that is about like, it's just trying to be emotional and get into like this super hyper emotional situation and kind of explore the feelings without actually truly being there.
Yeah.
And so it fits with Ed Sheeran. It was interesting. So when you say sellout, it sounds like he was trying to recapture the magic of, what's the one he did with Rihanna? Not Monster. Oh boy. The other big one with Rihanna.
Love the Way You Lie, of course. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm ashamed for not remembering that. But.
Yeah, same here. Happens. Yeah, it's such a shame for tracks like that. And obviously it was the second big single they released. And it's just make me think like, oh, well, I mean, it's not a big surprise. Ed Sheeran is he's selling huge records, right? Huge numbers of records. It makes sense from a financial point of view. It's kind of, I don't know, it's really taken away from the whole Eminem thing that I like so much about him. Yeah. And I still like him a lot, it's just that the music, that all that pop thing, all the features really just take away from it. When he did a thing with Dido, Stan, which is still one of the greatest rap songs out there in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And back then it felt like, but back then it felt underground because it was just a sample. It felt like it was stolen from another artist. It had that underground sampled kind of feel. And now we got these features, and they're really not, it's not that they just took a chorus from them and put it into a song like a sample. They really have, it's really a feature. Like there's tracks where, for example, Beyonce is doing like, not just like a chorus, but she's also adding like almost like a verse to it, or it's like two choruses with different lyrics. It feels like it was really specifically written for that song. And that's something that just takes away from that really underground idea for me. And I mean, at the same time, I know that he's not an underground artist anymore, and he has to grow with his fame as well, musically. Yeah. I just don't feel like this is it, unfortunately. But I feel like he's found his voice. I just don't think musically he has found his voice yet. And I think he still might in the future. I think he's still got it for sure.
Yeah, no, and you make a good point there. Is that, yeah, sound-wise, he kind of tried to reinvent himself on this album a little bit, and he tried to talk about the fame somewhat, and I haven't listened to every song he's ever written, so I'm obviously, there's going to be some people watching this series who know way more about Eminem than I do, which is personally what I love about explaining music on the internet, is like, no matter how many times I analyze and study a Taylor Swift song, there's always some 14-year-old who knows everything about it more than I do.
And we got some great comments for the last two videos that we made in this series. Some people have corrected us, and I think it's great. Like if you have if you hear anything on this podcast that you think is wrong, please just tell us in the comments, because it's something we want to hear as well. It's like we're all in this together, It's not like we can know everything about Eminem just because we listen to a lot of his music, or I read a couple of interviews, but it's not like we can know everything about him. If you know something, just please share it. It's great to hear.
And even if it's not like fixing something that we're saying, but if you just add to the conversation, it's so great to be able to democratize. I spend my days teaching at a university, right, where I'm the teacher at the front of the classroom. And I always feel kind of uncomfortable with that because I know that my students have things that they could be sharing too. And so I love the internet and the ability to make it a conversation. So, yeah. But you said something about Eminem. We were talking about his music currently, and how you said he has found his voice. And there was an interview with him that was really interesting where he spoke to that. And he actually said that it's getting harder to rap, but easier to rhyme. So like he was saying that like anytime he hears a word, he has like 50 rhymes for it floating around in his head. But at the same time, he feels like he's running out of topics and ways to approach those topics. So he's found his voice, but he's found his voice so much that he feels like he doesn't have much left to say about the things he's talked about. And so I think with this album, we saw like this interesting attempt to try to come up with new topics. And I can give you a little bit of maybe a summary of what a lot of the topics were on this album, if you're interested.
Yeah, great. Absolutely.
And I'll preface it by saying that I'm putting together a video for my channel called How Eminem Writes Lyrics, and I do a lot of breakdowns of like the percentages of how many of these songs. Like I spent like 10 hours analyzing these songs and some of his biggest hits to kind of figure out like how he had changed as an artist. And so I have like actual percentages on this stuff. And so like on Revival, 41% of the songs mention politics, but Slim Shady only shows up 12% of the time. He disses other people 35% of the time. He talks about his origins and where he's come from 41% of the time. He mentions or alludes to songwriting 65% of the time, refers to fans 18% of the time, and then he gets vulnerable and talks about like successes or failures like 59% of the time. And then probably most interestingly for him is his daughter. He mentions on 29% of the songs. So those are like the big topics. Of course, what would you expect from Eminem? Talking about his daughter, dissing other people. But the two I think feel like newish topics were talking much more politics than he's talked in the past, and then being I think more vulnerable on Revival.
Yeah. So we talked about this briefly before we started recording this podcast. Maybe about the production, because you said it felt a little bit off to you at points, that it felt like the vocals are too loud or something like that, or that the production felt a little bit rough around the edges.
Yeah, they just sometimes it feels like they don't fit. Like his voice was just overlaid over something else, and they didn't try to like make it work together.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe he's because he's gotten a lot of press about not sounding underground enough anymore. So maybe that was an attempt to do something like that, that it sounds a little bit more like he just took a beat and wrote a rap over it, and it wasn't like this constant back and forth between him and a producer to make that synergy work perfectly. So I think that might have been a reason for that, because there are, as you said, there are a couple of songs where the vocals are just a tad too loud, and you're like, wow, what's going on here? Or the vocals sound very bare, like there's nothing, like no effects. He's like, you have a little bit of room on there. I'm not even sure if that's a real reverb, like a reverb plugin, or if it's actually the room that he recorded in. It's funny. There's some tracks that sound really epic, and those are typically stuff like River and those kind of tracks sound really like epic, big, and perfectly produced. And then you have the other tracks on the album which sound very rough, but none of them really work for me, unfortunately, even from those tracks. There were a couple of features that he had. Like he had a couple of producers that he was worked with in the past, like Dr. Dre, but Dr. Dre only did like a really, really short instrumental interlude, track number 6, which is the Remind Me intro, which is sad. Like I would have liked to see more of Dr. Dre again. Also, he's worked with Rick Rubin again, whom he produced with on Berserk. And he did, I think, a bunch of tracks with him on this, at least 2 that I can see right now. First being, what's that? The one with the guitar. Oh yeah, Remind Me, which uses a big portion of I Love Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
It uses the guitar and the vocal samples, and it cuts them up to sort of reshape the message of the song. And then secondly, Heat, which is track number 14, which also uses guitars and scratching, and it kind of has that same vibe as Berserk did. What I don't really like about it. And I'm a huge Rick Rubin fan. He's one of my favorite producers out there. I mean, I discovered a lot of bands through him, really. And or I discovered a lot of bands and realized, oh wow, they're all produced by the same guy. That's kind of how it went for me. I don't really like rock guitars with Eminem. It doesn't really work for me. I don't know really.
Oh wow.
Does that work for you? I don't know. It felt
You're
like
talking about like the rock rap approach.
yeah. I mean, I used to love really new metal music. I was really into that when I was a teenager, and that I really like. But the guitars here feel more like what was that Rick Rubin, the Run DMC with Aerosmith. It felt more like that, and I never really liked that kind of mix of hip hop and rap and rock music. So it felt more like that. And coincidentally, that might also have been produced by Rick Rubin. Let me check that while you give your answer. Let me check that real quick.
Yeah, I don't have a huge problem with the rock and roll approach to rap, and I think that's definitely like one of Eminem's signature styles is doing that, which is really interesting because it's an interesting combination of white and African American culture taking rock and roll, something that's historically white America, and of course spreads out to the rest of the world too, and then African American culture and kind of combining those, which makes sense with who Eminem is because he was white living in a predominantly African American part of town up in Michigan. So I can definitely, it's interesting to see how like that combination, how he took kind of like the roots that he came from and made something out of that. Yeah. The sample of I Love Rock and Roll did feel a little bit out of place, and sometimes he'll do that, but when they produce it, there's another song where he does something like that. I think it is Offended, where he does that nursery rhyme thing, and it feels like overdone and hammed up, and that's a part of who Eminem is. If you listen to some of his older albums, he even has like skits on there. People are just acting weird and doing weird things, and everything is always kind of what's the word? It's just not ham-fisted, but it's very overblown, over-dramatized, just hammed up a little bit. And so and I feel like he does that when even when he brings in that sample, I Love Rock and Roll, at the same time he's still being like a hair sarcastic, it sounds like. And it's almost like he doesn't want to be there, but he's doing it and he's just going for it to get it over with, which is part of who Eminem is, I think. That's kind of the feeling I get from it. I don't know. Did you catch anything at all like that? Or if that was inaccurate, feel free to kindly segue away.
I don't know. It didn't make much sense to me, to be honest. Like I didn't find much reason for it other than maybe what you said, that it was maybe to like find the white edge to hip hop. I don't know. That's how I would maybe call it. That's kind of what it felt like. I don't know. It had like, I mean, it did have like this, because it uses scratching. Heat uses some scratching like Berserk did back in the day, I think. So it's. And also, by the way, I checked it out. Run DMC's and Aerosmith's Walk This Way was indeed produced by Rick Rubin. And it's got that kind of sampled rock kind of feel. And it's also very bare bones rock. It's not like it's fully produced, like really good sounding rock. It sounds a little bit clinical almost. So, but I didn't really like it. It didn't really make me feel anything. So I didn't really love it. But you talking about samples, there were a bunch of other samples as well, like A Rose uses The Rose by Bette Midler, and In Your Head uses Zombies, the Zombie by the Cranberries. By the way, Dolores O'Riordan just passed like a bunch of days ago on the 15th of January, the singer of the Cranberries, which can't have anything to do with this timing because obviously In Your Head was written a long time ago, way before it was released, obviously. But I just thought it was interesting to mention. And there were a couple of other moments where there were some samples used, but I must agree, it felt a little bit on the nose at times. It felt like this is just, what has this got to do with Eminem? It just doesn't feel like this is. Yeah. And also, it's using like the big portions of that song. You know what I liked about Dido's, the Dido sample that they used in Stan was that that was not the big line from the song. That was just a line from, I think, the verse or something, right? It just pops up somewhere in that Dido song.
Something that means something, that meant something personal to him, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like he's just doing it to like refer to that song. He's doing it because there was an idea in there he wants to refer to.
Exactly. And now it's just like, now it feels like, oh, we need a really big thing here, like something that people will instantly recognize so that they can sing along live. And that's just, That was my, yeah, that's kind of how it felt to me.
Yeah, I felt like the thing that this album suffered from was the same thing that rap is probably the biggest trap that rap falls into, and that's that he had 19 tracks on here, and some of them were pretty decent. There were some that I really liked, but there were a lot of them on there that were mediocre, and there were some that you could tell that he really cared about and he did a good job at. Some he just didn't really. Why do you have to release those other tracks? Like, just cut it down. Fall Out Boy just released a 10-track album. There's no rule that says a rap artist has to release X amount of tracks. So why doesn't he just get rid of some of the not so good ones? And the reason rap falls into that in general is because the way that they people often make raps is they'll freestyle it in the audience or in the booth, right? And they'll put it together while they're there. And sometimes Eminem's raps themselves can get too long. Not that he does super high quality with the rhyming and the lyricism when he does it. But I think it's easy for rap artists to put too much in there when really if you kind of spent some more time like honing your lyrics and started writing it as poetry first and then translated it to a rap, you can end up with something that's more of a diamond where it's like cut down and you've got only the best there. So it's like good thing after good thing after good thing after good thing. Whereas even with Eminem's raps on this, he would have, really good line, really good line, really good line. Oh my gosh, what was he thinking? Really good line, really good line, really good line. And I mean, that's really helpful if we want to get to know who Eminem is, which we do. But if you want like a masterpiece or something like that, like with Stan, and even, I don't know, I don't want to speak any ill against Stan, but there's like a couple of rhymes or allusions or words in there where I'm kind of like, oh, he didn't really think through that one. Even, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's really good rap, but I wish that he had just been a little bit more discerning and a little bit more willing to like leave things on the cutting floor.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's sometimes it's that imperfection that I find really interesting about that kind of music. I feel like music can be too clean. Sometimes I find it sad when I hear a piece of music and it's just too perfect. Especially with rap, I must say, like I like it when sometimes there's a line in there that's just, I used to listen to Korn a lot, and Korn I was a huge Korn fan, but 70% of it I didn't like. But I was listening for those 30% because those were real special. And because you just spend 70% of the song listening to stuff that isn't really that good, but then those 30% come along and you're like, oh, it was totally worth it. But it's worth it because those 70% weren't as good. So I kind of have that same feeling for a lot of this kind of independent music. If it's a lot of it is rough, but then there's this, but you get the feeling of a diamond in the rough. You have to listen to it a couple of times to really appreciate what it is. That's something I really cherish, actually. That's something I really like in music.
And that's kind of Eminem's brand, too, is like he's just going to be who he is and he doesn't care. And so it almost, I guess you're right, it wouldn't really feel completely like Eminem if it was so like perfectly manicured and put together well.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, what did you think about Believe? Because maybe I'll start a little bit off with what I noticed about it. It starts off with that line from Drake's Started From the Bottom. Actually, it starts off with the words started from the bottom, almost in that same kind of rhythm. And then it just plays on that rhythm a little bit. It feels like him trying to find himself in this new world of hip hop, in the way that hip hop has changed in the last 10 years. It has a trap beat as well, like it's got that kind of trap hi-hat. He does some rhythmically very interesting things. It still flows, but it's a very chopped up kind of rhythm. I find that super interesting. It stays mostly in 16th notes, which I found interesting. It's not going into that triplet kind of trap beat that we're so used to right now in hip hop. And it has another thing that I found really peculiar about it was that it ends on classical strings. That I found really like that came out of nowhere. I was a little bit surprised by that. I think it's just a cello and actually I think it turns into a quartet at the end there. But I found that track really interesting in terms of the rhythm, in terms of complexity. I really did like it. But what were your thoughts on it? And textually, I like in terms of lyrics, I also found it very interesting. It also felt like a more honest track, and his performance I also really, really liked.
You know what? I thought it was kind of the yin to the yang of Walk on Water. So Walk on Water, he's like,
absolutely,
people have beat me down, and I'm so sad, and I'm not sure if I can make it anymore. But you know what? I still wrote Stan, and it's a really good lead-in to Believe, where he's kind of like, all right, enough of all that. I got my confidence back for this track. Let's go at it. Like, do you guys still believe in me? Because if you don't, you're gonna fall behind. You're gonna look like idiots because I'm still here and I'm gonna still do great. So yeah, he talks about dissing other people. To me, they're just ink blots. I just fling them like slingshots and so precise. threatens to attack other people. His middle finger's free as a bird. But I like what you say about kind of that, like the staccato approach and how it's like chopped up. And I started from the bottom like a snowman. Yeah, and it's really interesting how he goes about it. And it doesn't sound like a lot of the other rhythms on the album.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that. But he does get a little bit... There's one line in here that was really good. I still remember the days of minimum wage for general labor, welfare recipient since a minor. Look how government assistance has made you. A lot of stuff that's politically relevant in America right now, or in the United States. But also he, talking about his origins, where he comes from, and then getting into dissing people. And it feels like with Walk on Water, he was defining where he is emotionally in relation to critics, and now he's defining where he is emotionally in relation to his quote-unquote enemies, or just people who want to see him fail.
Yeah. Cool. How about we move on to Chloroseptic? Or is there anything more you wanted to say about Believe? Because I think Chloroseptic is a super cool track as well.
No, let's move on to Chloroseptic.
So what I really liked about this one was just his flow. I thought was, again, it's out of this world. I mean, it's without a doubt, it's just, it's really cool what he's doing here. The first verse, he kind of stays away from the snare, and here we have a snare that's on 3 and 4. So typically in hip hop, we have the snare only on the 3. Here it's on 3 and 4. He kind of stays away from that in the first verse, where he only raps during the first 2 beats of the rap and just kind of leaves the 3 and 4 empty almost, or he just kind of weasels his way through the backbeat. And then in the second verse, he does something really interesting because he really follows that 3-4 with his rap. So he'll always place 2 really distinct notes on the 3 and 4. Quarter notes, basically, staccato quarter notes on the 3 and 4. And that tells me that he wrote the music, he wrote his rap onto the music, which is something that you don't always get in hip-hop. There are still hip-hop artists out there who write their raps absent of any music, right? They'll just have their notepad and they'll just write down lines, and then they'll come to the music and just rap it over whatever, and the beat doesn't really matter. And that gives you this very detached kind of feel. Here, you can definitely hear that there is a lot of connection between how he's rapping and the music itself, because he was actually, he took that backbeat, that snare, and he put it into his rhyming. So he's really following the beat here. And also in other tracks, for example, Untouchable, that was that guitar track. But it also had a rock guitar in it. He's also making references to the music while he's rapping. So, for example, in Untouchable, he's talking about a backwards groove, and then the groove actually reverses itself. Also, he's talking about the rock guitar, like about being a rock star or whatever, and the guitar has rock guitar in it. It's stuff like that I think is really quite cool, that becomes almost this meta kind of thing that I thought was really interesting, because you don't see that a lot in hip-hop. Hip-hop, traditionally, as I said, is all about sampling. It's about using a loop. It's kind of the same 4 bars that get looped over and over again. Maybe you take the beat out once or twice, but it's pretty much the same thing over and over again. And he's just interacting with the music. That I thought was interesting. He has that power to have, some of the biggest producers produce the music for him, and he's using that power to create a little bit of synergy there in terms of but mostly he's doing it from the lyrics, and it's not really, it's coming from the vocals. So the vocals are grabbing onto the music, but fortunately it's not really happening the other way around, which is, as I said, my biggest struggle with the album, that the music isn't really following what he's doing, but he's more following what the music is doing. Did you feel like that as well, and maybe in terms of lyrics?
Well, okay, so I think that what he's doing with the lyrics here is super intentional, and I don't know that I can speak to precisely what you're saying, but I think that there is an element where the music and the lyrics are both very carefully chosen, just in a different way. So Chloroseptic, there is definitely like a trap feel to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so with this, it's supposed to be a diss track against mumble rappers in general. And so there's a lot of, and this is probably the one that I'm the least prepared to comment on, just because there's a lot of references to sort of like mumble rap culture that are spread throughout, where he's just calling out specific people or saying things that have to do with specific mumble rappers. And so he borrows their flow at times, or he borrows the sound of their music, and then his lyrics, are kind of about mocking them, even as he's using them, or using their their elements or their signatures. And I think what he's essentially doing is he's proving that he can do it better than them. So he takes their flow and their music, and he says, oh yeah, like this is what you guys do, but listen to me actually say words here.
That's so cool. That's kind of what I do with holistic songwriting as well. A lot of times as people send in songs for feedback, it's like, here, look, here's how you could be doing it. That's it's kind of fun. He's doing that as well. I didn't really listen to the lyrics here because I was so interested in the rhythms of what he was saying. That's super interesting. That is super interesting. I'll definitely have to listen to that again. That sounds like a really interesting case study for a song, to really compare what these other artists did and how he took it and turned it into an Eminem track. It would be really interesting to see like what makes Eminem sound like Eminem by just looking at that one track.
Right. I think the particular line that really kind of summarizes the meaning of the song well is he says, this rap shit got me traveling place to place. You barely leave your house because you're always stuck at your pad. It's stationary. And so he's basically saying, you don't write anything. And he's talking, so.
Cool. Interesting.
Very.
Just in terms of like the modern touch of modern hip hop, there was a very few things. Like he almost never uses like that triplet kind of feel, like the Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang.
Yeah.
Hold on, that's 16th notes, but the da 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 that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
The triplets he almost never uses. There was one instance where he used it on Like Home with Alicia Keys, but almost never. It's pretty much all 16th note based. There's actually a really fun video, I don't know if you've seen it, of Snoop Dogg talking about that triplet.
Where he's like making fun of it. He's like, hubba-dub, hubba-dub, hubba-dub,
yeah.
hubba-dub, hubba-dub, hubba-dub.
It's called the Versace flow, and it's really funny.
Yeah, because Migos popularized it, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah, or Migos flow. Some people call it the Migos flow as well.
I love it when old school rappers make fun of mumble rappers. It's the funniest thing.
I like mumble rap a lot, actually. I like both sides. It's for me, it's not a preference. It's just different, but it's still funny to see.
Right, but I love the aspect of like old rappers, basically acting like old men and sitting around complaining about the new generation.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
These young people, but they don't know what they're talking about.
Exactly, because they were the same way in their generation. Back then it was I don't know what was before them. I guess country stars were probably saying the same thing about them. So I thought that was really funny. One track that I found really cool as well was Framed, which I think had some really funny lyrics, and rhythmically it was I wouldn't say interesting, but cool, because it's just eighth notes. It's just a long note of eighth notes, but they're all super staccato. So he's doing this chopped up thing again. So rhythmically, actually very simple, but it's just a way of it's just a type of flow that you don't hear that much. Did you have anything about the lyrics for Framed?
Oh gosh, I mean, Framed was probably the most Slim Shady-esque song on the entire album. And mentions of Slim Shady in this album were down compared to the top 15 songs that I analyzed from him. So Slim Shady didn't get mentioned as often, but this was the one that was most like, this sounds like something Slim Shady would rap about. And it's basically him, kind of playing, doing sort of an imaginary what if, like what if somebody murdered somebody based on the rhythm or, the stories in my raps. And then, the police tried to pin it on me, what would happen? So, and then he kind of, there's like this sort of gray line where he can't quite remember what he did last night. So there's a chance it was him, but he's claiming he was framed, and he probably was, but he still like has like these memories of doing something like that. And it's hard for him to decipher in this, like between the lyrics, what was real. So that's the essential idea coming out here, but it's also one of the most, visceral songs on the entire album. One of the most I guess vulgar would be the right word. I think a lot of people's complaints about Eminem center around him being swearing too much, talking about raping people too much, talking about violence, all sorts of stuff that keeps him off of the radio station. And this was interesting because Framed actually had some of the most mentions of things like that of any song on the album. I did a fun calculation where I counted all of the, quote unquote things parents might object to, and then I divided it. It's so fun. It's so fun. I think he's actually just as vulgar as he used to be, which is interesting. Like he has like an average of 2.07 vulgar things per 100 words.
Oh,
and on his
I love
15 most popular songs, he was like 2.08. So it was almost like scientific. It was amazing.
That's great.
But on Framed, it's like 4.43. So
wow.
it's like double as offensive as anything else that he writes. So it was, and that's because he's talking about these situations that his song lyrics get himself into, and that this, hypothetical copycat killer is doing. And so it was a lot of fun to look at that.
That's great. I love those numbers. That's super cool. Were there any other tracks that really stood out to you? I think we should maybe end on Castle and A Rose, which I think have a really interesting and beautiful ending. I think it was such a beautiful close to this album. That should be mentioned for sure. Is there anything else? I mean, I had one more thing with A Rose.
Yeah.
I really didn't like the two vocals at the same time in the background, having the Rose of Betty Midler and then him rapping over it. I found it really confusing. I said that in my video on, what was that again? I think it was Bruno Mars. He actually criticized the Beatles, believe it or not. Heresy.
Wait, who criticized the Beatles?
I did criticize the Beatles.
Oh, no, Friedemann, no.
I know, and I've gotten a lot of negative backlash from it. But I stand by what I said. If you have two vocals at the same time, it becomes confusing. Just from an arranger's standpoint, it's not something you want to do. You can still do it if you're really confident in what you're doing. If Eminem does it and the Beatles do it, you can do it. You can do it too, but it might not work as well as if you had just like separated them both in terms of the time.
Yeah.
So that's something I didn't really like about that track. But man, what a close to an album!
Wait, say what?
What a close to an album! As a closer, I think it was just beautiful. Because do you want to? It's a lyrical theme, so do you want to explain what happens in Castle and how he comes back to it in A Rose?
Basically in Castle, he's talking to his daughter saying, hey, I'm so sorry that I kind of put us in this place. And now, you're kind of in this castle and you're on this pedestal and you're going to kind of always be in the public eye. And I kind of wish that I hadn't done that. If I could go back, I wouldn't release any albums, which is funny because on Believe, he says, I'm going to release more albums. I'll never stop. But then on A Rose, he goes back to, I think it was 2007 when he overdosed accidentally on pills. And he thought he was going to die. If he had gotten to the hospital a couple hours later, he would have died. And so he kind of is sitting there. Essentially, the song takes place with him sitting on the hospital bed, looking up and just thinking about, his life. He tells his daughters in the song, "Daddy ain't making it home for Christmas. Wish I had the strength to just blow a kiss." He tells them to open presents without him. And then he talks about their mom a little bit. And then he talks about like a friend who had died earlier. He's thinking, all right, this guy's going to like welcome me as I come into, the afterlife here. And it's super intense. He's talking about like nurses leaning over the bed, pulling tubes out. And then he says, to remind me from this dream, I need to re-find my inner strength. And so it kind of is revealed that this whole thing is like him thinking back to that and feeling that dream and experiencing it. And now he is back in the present. He's like, I need to like rewrite a mistake, are the words that he uses.
And that mistake, I think what I think is really cool is Castle ends on basically like a suicide note, right? It ends on a really, really dark note. And in A Rose, he said, like, I need to right this wrong. And basically you hear this like this rewind thing. And then it's back to that beat from Castle. And basically he's redoing that last verse of Castle where he basically killed himself, or he was talking about killing himself. And rights that wrong, literally, by reversing the beat and just doing another verse like that.
Yeah, at the end of A Rose, he says, I'm sliding down a slippery, or as a goodbye note, because your dad's at the end of his rope, which is an allusion to suicide. I'm sliding down a slippery slope. Anyway, sweetie, I better go. I'm getting sleepy. Love, dad, shit, I don't know. We hear the sound of a body falling. And then, you're right. He goes back and rewinds it on A Rose because it's split into two parts. And it's interesting, too, because A Rose is one of the only songs without with raps, but without a chorus. And so it's completely rap.
Yep.
And part one is him talking about a rose and kind of saying, all right, here I am on my deathbed thinking about things. Part two is Castle extended. He says, let's go back and let's fix it. Yeah. I'm about to, like a match, outdo relapse with recovery, Mathers, LP2, help propel me to victory laps, he says. So he basically says, all right, my career's back on. Let's do it.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's such a beautiful close to this album. And I love stuff like that. You know, I think the tracks where it's just him, also my favorite tracks on the album. I don't really like the features that much. As I said, they allude too much to pop to me, even if they're great features. Like the melodies are all great that are being performed here, all great performances. It's just not what I want out of Eminem. Like the others just feel more like him, you know, and I feel like he's enough to offer to fill an entire album just with his own vocals. Or maybe like if they had put in some more underground hip hoppers, you know, underground rappers, I would have been fine with that too. Like he did on few previous albums, you know, where he had some more underground rappers. I thought that was really cool. I maybe want to end on a quote that I read from Rick Rubin, which I thought was really interesting because there's really what I find really impressive about Eminem above all else is that he always, with everything that he does, he always has three things that he's doing at the same time when he's writing lyrics. So first of all, he's always telling a story that makes sense. It's never just like line after line that have no connection. He's telling us a logical story, or maybe not a story, but it's you could read it as a logical text, right? Everything has a nice logical flow to it. It's not just like what a lot of rappers these days do, where it's just like gag after gag after gag, or like this metaphor or this simile or whatever. It's just where it's just punchline, 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 and they have nothing to do with each other.
Yep, you're so right. You're so right. I Hate Motorsport. They do that on there and a couple of other places. Yeah.
So he really tells stories that make sense, and every lyric makes sense within itself. Like every song is about something. It's not just all, oh, this is just lifestyle, and it's all about just lines that have to do with the lifestyle. No, every song has a theme, and every song has a particular flow that he's really going with. And it feels like, especially with Chloroseptic, if you listen to that, that's a flow that you don't hear on any of his other songs, you know? It's just tied to that very specific song. And that's what I like about him. It's not just like he's just rapping over music. There's really a connection with the music. So first of all, it's a story that makes sense. There's that flow that keeps repeating, where he has, like, as we discussed earlier, he has that line, and then he just keeps repeating that rhythm and messes with it and keeps that rhyming going in different ways. That he's doing as well. So he has a story that makes sense. He has that flow that just keeps repeating over and over again, which cements it into the music. And then thirdly, he's doing all those rhymes, and there's double and triple rhymes, and there's inner rhymes, and there's so much rhyming going on. And all of those things he's doing at the same time. And so I want to end, as I said, on this quote by Rick Rubin, which I thought was kind of talking about that a little bit. And he said, M is hypercritical of detail, and he hears the music in a very deep way. And this is all one sentence, by the way. I'm going to read this again. This is just one sentence. It's crazy. So M is hypercritical of detail, and he hears the music in a very deep way, and hears internal rhythms in tracks, and writes words to work on so many different levels, rhythmically, within what's going on musically, to where if we change a little thing in the track to better the track, it might not work in his mind to how it relates to what he's saying, how he's phrasing it. And then I think sums it up pretty well. It just makes a lot of sense to me. Eminem he's really interacting with the music. There is a lot of attention to detail. And rhythmically, this wouldn't work with other music. If you took one of his raps, put it to another backing track, it probably wouldn't. It would kind of fall flat, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, he just pays so much attention to detail. And what you were just saying, those three things that Rick Rubin was saying, the song makes sense, the lines make sense.
That's something that came from me, actually. Sorry.
Oh,
that
okay.
wasn't maybe completely clear.
Oh, okay. No, my bad. But those three levels of things, I would add one to that, and I would say that every syllable makes sense. He's so intentional. And especially if you watch some of the Genius.com videos where they'll like color code a stanza of Rap God, and they show, they'll say like this word rhymes with this word, and they'll use like the color red for that particular sound, and they'll show all the other places that sound shows up. It's freaking amazing because there's almost not a syllable that doesn't have a color and that isn't matching something else. And that's an exaggeration, but a huge percentage of the words that he puts in his songs have some sort of a sound correlation with something else. It's amazing.
It's phenomenal. It really is phenomenal. So, anyways, Cliff, did you have anything more to say?
No, I do not. This
Then I think we can finish this off. Thanks,
Sounds good.
everyone, for listening and watching for the very first time. This is something we've been experimenting with for this episode, and hopefully we're going to do that in the future as well. Sorry for all the rubble in the background. I'm still recording some videos. But I hope you all enjoyed this.
Yeah.
And
if you heard my dog in the background, that's a dog. So there's some noise in the background on my side too. So you have rubble and I have a dog.
good, perfect. See, we're equal. Cool. Hey, this was so much fun. I'm looking forward to the next one next month, and I shall see you around.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
Cheers.